NASCAR explains the controversial Daytona caution calls, and Hendrick Motorsports unveils an expansive Xfinity Series schedule. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove midweek edition, our final Daytona 500 discussion coming up in a moment. But first, this episode is sponsored by Peanut Patch. Boiled peanuts are the South's favorite snack. If you're headed to Atlanta Motor Speedway this weekend, stop by the Peanut Patch trailer. Brent and Bart would love to chat with you, give you some free samples. Peanut Patch is available at Walmart and Sam's Club, also available at over 27,000 convenience stores nationwide. You can learn more and actually purchase their peanuts as well on their website, which I'll also link down in the description below. Again, if you're headed to Atlanta Motor Speedway this weekend, keep a lookout for Peanut Patch. Good guys, great time. Appreciate them sponsoring Out of the Groove. The ratings are in. The 67th Daytona 500 on Fox earned an average of 6.76 million viewers. That's up 13% over the 5.9 million viewers who watched last year's Monday race. According to Fox Sports, viewership peaked during the start of the race, that 2:05 to 2:15 Eastern Time window. Despite the more than 3-hour rain delay, the Daytona 500 was still the most watched sporting event of the weekend, beating the NBA All-Star Game. First impression, I think those are decent numbers, considering the race was moved up an hour last minute, and then of course got delayed due to rain. But let's compare this year's Daytona 500 viewership to the last 6 Daytona 500s. Noticeably higher than last year's Monday race, but down from 2023 and 2022 that went on as scheduled. 2021 was especially low. It also ran Sunday night, but it was delayed even later than this year's 500 was, hence the lower viewership number. It's interesting that the 2020 race, which was pushed to a Monday, actually had higher viewership than this year's Sunday night edition. Overall, though, when you compare this year's 500 to recent 500s that were delayed or impacted by weather, I think the viewership is pretty well in line. That graphic just shows you how unlucky NASCAR has been with the weather. I say unlucky. When you schedule the Daytona 500 for 3 o'clock Eastern Time in Florida, you're asking for trouble. I'm not saying we should go back to noon Eastern starts. I understand that NASCAR and Fox want to attract more of that West Coast audience. But as long as we have these late afternoon start times, the weather in Florida will continue to be a storyline. We'll get back to the Daytona 500 in just a moment, but first there was some breaking news. Hendrick Motorsports today announced they'll make 16 Xfinity Series starts with their number 17 Chevrolet. All 4 of their Cup Series drivers will get seat time, as will 19-year-old Corey Day. Here's the breakdown. William Byron will make their season debut in a week and a half at Circuit of the Americas. He also has the Spring Charlotte race. Alex Bowman will run the Phoenix Spring event. Chase Elliott, Darlington, Kyle Larson, Homestead, and Bristol. Right in his wheelhouse. And then Corey Day has 10 races scheduled. I'll show them to you again. It's a good mix of tracks. Couple of Martinsville races, some intermediates, a road course, or 2 road courses, I should say. Basically a little bit of everything but a super speedway for Corey Day, the dirt racing phenom. I'll be curious to see how Corey Day adjusts to big track stock car racing. Again, he comes from sprint cars. Earlier this offseason, he did a virtual press conference where he talked about, when Jeff Gordon first reached out to him and his family about maybe going NASCAR racing. And I remember him explaining that before that call, he'd never considered going stock car racing or even racing anything on pavement for that matter.
I never, thought I'd run a pavement car my entire life. I thought I'd just be a full-time sprint car driver. So it was nothing that I didn't want to do. I'd say it was more of, a fantasy than a dream. It was just, out of reach for me. Coming from California, you got to get a really big break. There's no, pipeline for pavement racing. So I always wanted to do it. I think it's every American race car driver's dream to be in the Cup Series one day. But for some, it's farther fetched than others. And I thought it wasn't going to happen for me.
10 Xfinity Series races for Hendrick Motorsports development driver Corey Day. I'm excited to see what he can do. I promised we'd talk about the Daytona 500, perhaps one final Daytona 500 discussion this week. The end of Sunday night's race was controversial for a couple of reasons. One, of course, it was another Daytona 500 ending with a massive crash. 6th place William Byron sneaks through to get the win. But also NASCAR. Their decision to not wave the yellow flag, to let that race, the final nearly half a lap, play out under green despite more than half the field being swept up in an accident. It did not appear to be consistent with their call Thursday night in the duels when they threw the yellow 100 feet before the start finish, changing the outcome of that race. Hauler Talk is a new podcast hosted by NASCAR communication directors Amanda Ellis and Mike Ford, also reporter Nate Ryan, and they promise to analyze, break down every controversial call throughout the season. Week 1, they've already got their work cut out for them. They interviewed Cup Series race director Juzan Hamilton, the man responsible for pressing the button in the booth, and he admitted that they got the call Thursday night in the duel race wrong. He admitted that they should have waited an extra second or two before pressing the button. That way the race could have finished under green, and they still could have gotten safety vehicles to the wreck in a timely fashion. It was a very quick trigger, but what I said Thursday night is that at least it was fairly consistent with how NASCAR calls cautions throughout the race. They don't wait an extra few seconds on lap 20 or lap 107, so if they call it one way throughout the race, why should they call it much differently on the final lap? At least that's consistent. That was my take. All weekend long, dual race, truck, Xfinity, NASCAR threw the caution before the checkered flag when there was a big crash. Pretty consistent, I'd say. But that all went out the window Sunday night at the end of the Daytona 500. Leaders crashed down the back straightaway heading into turn 3. Cars continued to wreck on the banking, yet no caution was thrown. They let William Byron, Tyler Reddick, the whole field race back to the line. I haven't seen NASCAR swallow the whistle like that in years. Juzan Hamilton explained on Hauler Talk why the Sunday night incident was different than the Thursday night incident. This was his explanation, quote, "On Sunday, for example, that's right after an overtime restart. It's not often that right after a restart you have a lot of vehicles laying back or stragglers getting caught up. So when you have that wreck taking place, the field is entirely condensed. As soon as the wreck happens, because all vehicles have passed by that turn 2 cutout, we're able to respond. We're already sending the fire trucks, ambulances to respond to that incident before the leaders even made it to the checkered, even though there was no caution." Okay, so he's right about one thing, and I think he's dead wrong about another. He's correct that, yes, after rewatching the finish, it looked like nearly every car was past that turn 2 opening when the crash occurred, which means safety vehicles could begin to go out onto the track without the fear of oncoming traffic getting in their way. Now, I don't love sending safety vehicles onto a hot green racetrack, certainly not a super speedway, but that's another conversation. He is right, I suppose, about that. But where I think he's wrong, he says because they just had a restart, the field was condensed. They were all in this one pack. There were no stragglers. You can see right here, last lap of the race. Look in the background. There are a handful of stragglers, quote unquote. And then if we fast forward to the actual crash, let's just watch this in real time. Okay. They're crashing. Right about now is when they would typically have thrown the caution if this was lap 55, for example. But okay, they let it stay green for another couple of seconds, but pause it right here. At this point, we've gone a long time without a caution, and there are still several cars behind the wreck. I mean, the track, look, there's cars angled up towards the wall. Most of the track is blocked, and there are still, you can see, cars approaching the incident that, because it's green, are supposed to stay in the gas, not slow down. And don't forget about those stragglers that aren't even in the picture yet. They're expected now to drive through this crash at damn near full speed because there's no caution. Look, all I ask for is consistency. If they want guys to race back to the line on the white flag, okay, we can set that new precedent. We can have a separate conversation about driver safety. I don't think a crash in turn 3 of that magnitude should go without a caution, but say a crash like that happened coming out of turn 4 or onto the front stretch. If you want to leave it green for a few extra seconds, I'm not necessarily opposed. But again, that's a separate conversation. The conversation I was trying to have Sunday night and the conversation I want to have right now is about consistency. NASCAR called every other Daytona finish differently than the Sunday night Daytona 500 finish. That's where I have a problem. Shoot, the 2023 and 2024 Daytona 500s were called differently than the 2025 Daytona 500. They both ended with a button push because of a big wreck on the last lap. For some reason, they called the finish to the 2025 500 completely differently. Nobody expected, even the broadcast booth. Mike Joy, Kevin Harvick, Clint Boyer were dumbfounded, speechless. We're still green. Kevin Harvick on his podcast this week, I saw criticize the inconsistency. I'm right there with him. If we want to race back to the checkered, we can have that conversation, but that hasn't been the precedent set up to this point. The way they called the finish to the Daytona 500 was very inconsistent with how they've called nearly every other race finish the past few years. That's the problem. That's why so many in the sport and outside the sport criticize NASCAR officiating, because they have a history of being extraordinarily inconsistent when it comes to things like this. This isn't a ball or strike call. This is pass interference to decide the Super Bowl. The end of the race is a huge moment. Them deciding to not throw the caution didn't impact the winner of the race. Byron would have won either way, but it certainly impacted the top 5, top 10, top 20 finishing results 100%. This isn't some inconsequential decision. No, this is the race on the last lap. I'll end with this. Juzon Hamilton did admit at the end of this podcast that going forward, NASCAR is going to try to be more hands-off. He said, quote, "Moving forward and always, our goal is to get to a green flag finish. We do not want to be the ones that are determining the race by how fast we push the caution button or by decisions we make in race control in general." Okay, cool. Does that mean we're racing back to the checkered from here on out? Like, how quick will the trigger be next time? Did we set a new precedent Sunday night? Like, it's hard to know now what the correct call is because the calls have been so inconsistent for so long. That's the problem. That's why I criticize. I do appreciate Juzon Hamilton and the folks at Hauler Talk having this conversation. Yes, I know they're all affiliated directly with NASCAR, but at least they're asking the question and giving themselves an opportunity to respond, to explain themselves. It's interesting, even if we don't agree, to hear how the NASCAR Cup Series race director views these different crashes. Agree with him or not, he's the guy who's going to make the next call and the call after that. So it's interesting to hear a little bit of how he thinks, even if I may disagree with his observations, let's say. Anyway, give me your response down in the comment section below. I'll link the full Hauler Talk podcast episode down below. I believe Juzon Hamilton comes on around the halfway point, so be sure to check that out if you're interested. Thanks for watching, folks. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more NASCAR news, rumors, commentary, race recaps, and more. Big thank you to my very generous Patreon supporters, of course. I posted a different video earlier today as well, talked a little about Cletus McFarland, the Cletus effect, also gave y'all my Super Speedway power rankings. Check that out if you missed it. I'll see you again tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, folks. Thanks for tuning in.